Hey guys, welcome to the Arzen channel, and today I got the Retroid Pocket in front of me. This is the device I have been waiting most for in 2020, and I'm happy that it's out, and it might be one of the best handhelds that 2020 has seen. It runs full-fledged Android 6.0, it is fully customizable, has a tempered glass screen lens and even a tempered glass screen protector. It has all inputs, separate inputs, the analog stick is separate, the D-pad is separate, and even though they did not add L and R buttons, it still has L and R buttons on the side. So the volume buttons are actually remappable to L and R buttons, which is quite a nice touch, while you are still able to control the volume in-game. They did work a lot on the software. The software is a lot better than the last iteration, the Pandora A19, which I actually got over here. So it had a very heavily modified Android version, while in this case it is fully customizable and it is a bare-bone Android 6.0. It still has Wi-Fi, it still has Bluetooth. You're able to hook it up to the television with the micro HDMI that it has. You can still do that and hook up for controllers and play with your friends. And yeah, it has all the good features that this one had, and it even fixed most of the issues that people were complaining about. This one did not have a tempered glass screen lens, and it had issues with fogging behind the screen. That was because of the overheating issue it had, and in this one that is completely fixed, which means in this case, in my opinion, even though a lot of people who don't know how to work with emulators and ROMs did like this one, it is completely obsolete with the Retroid Pocket coming out or being out in the market. Both of them are still for sale, which is a very confusing thing. So you might end up wanting a Retroid Pocket and buying a Pandora A19 if you didn't concentrate on what you're buying. So the link is down in the description below in case you want to check it out. Why the main reason this is one of the best handhelds out there is because it is cheap. It is $80 or $85 depending on the discounts they give. And you can put your own emulators on there, your own ROMs on there. It is very stable, very well optimized. It has a sleep mode, of course, unlike RetroPie handhelds. RetroPie handhelds is another very notorious and famous option for retro gaming. But with this one out, it is a lot more stable because here the SD card could just get corrupted if you don't safe shut down it. In this case that will not happen because it always shuts down in a safe way. So that is very nice to know. And we had some the big guns of retro emulation, namely the Gpd Xd Plus. It was a very good option for retro gaming and emulation. It was one of the best ones actually until this one came out. The reason why I don't recommend getting this anymore for the time being is because this one is $80 and this one is $230. If you already have this one, then you don't need to buy this one because it beats the crap out of it still in terms of performance and inputs and outputs and sound quality and stuff like that. But the screen is not 3x4 inch, 3x4 aspect ratio. That's still a bummer. So let's go over how the handheld feels in my hand. Now, like the last iteration of this handheld, it has a satisfying click to it, and I like it very much. And it is very easy to use in-game. It's not a problem. The D-pad is also very good. It doesn't pivot over a ball, but still it is a very good D-pad, and I really like the fact that they did add those chiseled out D-pad on the circular pad. It still makes it a lot easier to use and a lot better to use. I even like the fact that you can press in between here. Makes it easier to get in between the D-pad grooves. And the analog stick still feels phenomenal. It is a PS Vita analog stick, modified PS Vita analog stick. And we got the volume up and down buttons, which actually double as the L and R buttons to the side. We got the power button with the LED indicator, which is a lot more dimmer than the last iteration, so you don't get blinded at night. And to the top, we got a micro USB port. I would have wished for a USB Type-C, but that will do. A TF card slot, which is very nice. because the internal storage is not enough. The headphone jack and a micro HDMI socket over here. This is very nice because you can just hook it up to a television and, you know, connect for Bluetooth gamepads or even to any number and play with your friends. You have to note that the screen resolution is 640 by 480, so that is what will display on your screen. And for the rest, before checking out the software, check out the hardware of the handheld. Now the hardware is right in front of you on the screen. It is easy to notice that it is outdated hardware, but it is good enough for all kinds of emulation and some apps that you can run, some games. Of course, not utility apps, and they're not really for this kind of handheld, but GTA San Andreas, Halflife, and a lot of nice games are still working on this one with gamepad support, which is very nice. Of course, you're not going to run any Call of Duty mobile on it, so keep that in mind. It is Android 6.0, not the newest Android, but still better than some other Android handhelds that I have seen that run Android 4.4. So this one is still better than that. The nicest thing that I find very important about this handheld is the 4:3 aspect ratio, which is perfect for emulation and stuff like that, and retro games. Let's get into the software part of things. So let's just open it up. Of course, you have complete Android. Right now I have it in cursor mode. How you go into cursor mode is you press the home button for 1 second, then it goes into mouse mode, and you have a cursor, as you can see, going over the screen. You can increase the speed using the left button and decrease it using the right D-pad button. You can change pages with up and down, because it's page up and page down. The left click of the mouse is A, while B is going back. So even though it doesn't have a touchscreen, they did keep it in consideration, and it is easy to use even though there is no touchscreen. So, and going back to normal gamepad mode, it actually simulates a PS3 gamepad, as I noticed from the settings and stuff like that. Probably the hardware of it is similar to a PS3 DualShock, but it doesn't have all the inputs. There still lacks another analog stick and stuff like that. So there is not really a lot of streaming that you can do on this handheld, just to keep that in mind. Now, another thing that we have in this software, things that they optimized, is we got a toolbox over here where you can clean your background processes, limit your background processes, and the volume key function you can set to L and R buttons and stuff like that, which is very nice. You can disable apps and view tips and stuff like that. Very nice and very compact. It is a very lightweight Android, by the way. As you can see, it is very swift, very fast. Settings take some time, but that's not a problem. So you go to apps. You can check your apps and stuff like that, like any Android device. A very important thing that we need to check out is storage and USB. So first, when you get this handheld, you got an internal SD card of 30 GB or 32 GB, but the SD card is 32 GB, but the internal storage is only 2.4 GB, and most apps and emulators download to the internal storage. What you can do in that case is format the SD card to your handheld, the Android version. As you can see here, default write disk, set it to the SD card, and then it will format your SD card. So if you got stuff on your SD card, you got to back it up, and then you can click on this, it will format it, and it will be as if it is part of the memory. So you can see here the SanDisk SD card is plugged in. It will show up on the PC when you plug it into your PC as well, which is very nice. You can just drag and drop the ROMs to each folder, and also the APKs, which are the app files. Okay, you can install apps directly using your handheld. And that is about the storage. Now we got, of course, display control for the brightness and stuff like that. The battery life, as I have shown on the screen, is a 4000 milliampere battery. It doesn't deplete very fast, and it doesn't charge very fast, which is kind of a bummer, but I don't intend on using this for so many hours. You can play N64 games and stuff like that for around 3 to 4 hours in my experience. Until then you can play the games, and then you need to charge it, and it charges in 5 hours or 4 hours, in that ballpark. Now what we got as well, by side full Wi-Fi and full Bluetooth 4.0. Let's check out the Android version, show you that it is 6, as you can see. And you can system update the device without formatting SD cards and, you know, replacing the firmware by burning it to the SD cards and writing it to the SD card. So if they release updates, it will show up here. And then you can check for updates and stuff like that. So that is it about the settings. Now what else you can do with this Android is you can go to Play Store, and it is very swift as well. It works very well. One thing that is cumbersome when you're trying to search for things is that you have to use the keyboard in this way. It still works. It does remind me of the PlayStation Portable days, the PSP, stuff like that, and so I wouldn't really complain, but it is good enough. You can get all the buttons, key presses, it all works. You can search for all kinds of stuff and it will show up, and since it's Android 6.0 it really works well. Now what I think is a good idea is let's go over the emulators that I use. Not all of them are the stock emulators. These are the emulators that I cherry picked and think are the best for this handheld. So let's get into some gameplay, and I'm going to tell you about the emulators as well. Now, first things first, we got the Ppsspp emulator. I'm running Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII. There are some frame drops, but it is quite playable and isn't really much of a bother to me, even though there's a lot of frame skipping and stuff like that going on. Crisis Core Final Fantasy isn't the most demanding PSP games. You cannot really run God of War and all those very demanding PSP games. Example of that is the Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep game. It's also by Square Enix, by the way. The thing about it is that there are a lot of frame drops, and it actually isn't very playable. So this isn't the perfect powerhouse when it comes to PSP emulation, but yeah, I mean, we just bought this for 80 bucks. We can't really complain about that. It isn't perfect, of course. But the thing that is nice to notice is DS Emulator is working quite well on this handheld. I actually can switch between screens using the volume up and down buttons, and there are enough buttons to utilize the emulator quite well. The emulator here is called Ppsspp Emulator for Android. You can find it on Google Play Store, and it is actually paid, but it is a one-time purchase thing, so it is worth it in my opinion, and nothing else can run it as good as the Ppsspp Emulator. Moving on to the next emulator, this is the Epsxe emulator for Android. It's also a paid emulator from the Play Store app, but it also is worth it. There aren't any other PlayStation emulator unless you download a RetroArch, which is not really my go-to option when it comes to Android emulation, stuff like that, but it works quite well. I got frame skip turned on just in case, but it isn't really, I don't see it frame skipping a lot in Tekken 3. This is the AFBA emulator. It's for Neo Geo, MAME, and Fireburn Alpha and stuff like that, the arcade emulator. AFBA is the best I found because it can run the newer games as well as the older games. This is King of Fighters 2003. So it's hard to find an emulator that runs this version of King of Fighters, and this one does, so it is the best emulator available. Also in frame rate, I noticed that this one is the best as well. Next up we have the Snes9x Emulator EX Plus. It runs alright on the Android version, but it's kind of frame skips a couple of times. I noticed maybe I have to turn off frame skip for it to be normal, but I didn't turn it off, I guess. But it should run a lot more smoother than most of the emulators on here. I don't know why it is choppy here. This is the MD.emu Genesis emulator for Android. I noticed that the group of emulators made by this developer mostly are top-notch and are very good quality. So I got problems with the audio on other emulators, in this game in particular, but this emulator really just flies. So this is the best emulator. It's called MD.emu. It is a paid emulator on the Play Store, but it is well worth every penny. This here is the My Old Boy emulator. It can run Game Boy and Game Boy Color ROMs alike. It is a very good emulator. It does the job. It's of course very lightweight, but it is a perfect emulator when it comes to Game Boy games and stuff like that. You can also map Turbo A and stuff like that in the emulator, which is very nice to see. Once again, this is a paid emulator. It isn't that expensive. All of these emulators aren't very expensive, so it is a one-time purchase. I purchased it a long time ago, and it still stays with me for, forever. This is the My Boy emulator. It is like the My Old Boy made by the same developer. It works very well, and like the last emulator, I think it's quite lightweight as well. And yeah, there are no frame drops that I notice. It runs perfectly fine. So here we have the N64 OID emulator. This one works best with most ROMs. There is another one that is a lot faster, the MUPEN Plus FZ emulator. But the thing about that one is it doesn't run all the ROMs that I throw at it. That's what I noticed. So I use the N64 OID because it's more stable when it comes to what ROM it picks. It's not picky. And it is for free. Both of these emulators are for free, by the way. You can find them on the Play Store, and the other one you can find it on the internet, because N64 OID is not available in the Play Store, only in APK format. Moving on, we got the Raycast emulator for Dreamcast. And yeah, it wasn't really easy to set up, but after it is set up, it just works well. And there are some graphical glitches here and there, especially in Rayman, The Great Escape. Stuff like that isn't really playable, but it works with most ROMs quite well. Sonic Adventure is an example of that. It runs very well on this handheld, which is not something you see on other $80 handheld emulators out there. Now let's move on to some apps that I like to run on this handheld. For example, GTA San Andreas works really well on the handheld on low settings. So I'm testing around how the aim system works, because there's only one analog stick on there. It is kind of finicky, the control scheme, but you can get used to it, I guess. If you really want to play San Andreas on this handheld, then yeah, that's something you gotta get used to. So yeah, I'm having a hard time actually aiming at the policeman and giving him a couple of punches. Now, moving on to the next app that runs really well with gamepad and stuff like that supported. This is Sonic 4 Episode 2. And yeah, it works very well on this handheld, surprisingly. It is a free app currently, so you can just test it out and run it on your handheld. It is a very nice game to run on any Android device. I installed it on every Android device I have, but that it runs on the Retroid Pocket is really blowing my mind. Moving on to the last app is the Sash 3D Halflife emulator. You can run Counter-Strike 1.6 and Half-Life, Team Fortress and stuff like that on the handheld, but as you can see, it is quite a weird grip that you have to grab your handheld in, because there are a lot of buttons that you need to utilize and they're not really located at the most easiest of spots. So I really hope that there were actually trigger buttons, L and R shoulder buttons and stuff like that on this handheld, but sadly they don't have that yet. Maybe in the next iteration we can see that happening. Yeah, so pretty much that it is for this video. I hope you liked the video and it was helpful at all. Please like and subscribe, and I see you guys in the next video.